Hey, what is up, everybody? I'm Jorge. Welcome to Shoot the Gap, the Fantasy IDP podcast here on the Fantasy and Frames podcast. Tonight, joined by two amazing people in the IDP fantasy football space. First, we got Jon Macri from PFF, host of the Big Nickel IDP podcast, and returning. He was just here last week, and he loved it so much he wanted to come back. Of course, talking about Leo McNeely, aka Master IDP on Twitter from RPO Football. They're both here tonight to discuss rookies we're targeting in balanced, tackle heavy, and big play IDP scoring leagues after the 2023 NFL Draft. So stay tuned as we get this show on the road. All right, before we get started with tonight's show, please make sure to head over to our YouTube page and subscribe for more actionable fantasy football content and advice from topics ranging from Dynasty and Redraft, Best Ball DFS, and of course, IDP. No matter the topic, we got you covered. Also, make sure to head over to fantasyandframes.com to read all of our latest article postings and see our player rankings. If you are on Twitter right now watching us and want to ask us a question, unfortunately, we can't see. But where we can see your questions and comments is over on our YouTube channel. So head over there. And while you're there, hit that like, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell so that you're notified whenever we put out fantasy football content here from Fantasy and Frames. And with that, let's get to our guest for this evening. Let's welcome first. It's been a long time, Jon. Welcome back to Shoot the Gap. How you been, man?
I've been good. I appreciate you guys having me back, and excited. This is still the fun part of the off season where we're just kind of coming off the draft and stuff, and trying to figure out how these rookies fit into their new teams and stuff. So it's an exciting part of the off season. I'm happy to talk some rookies with you guys tonight.
Now, be honest with me. How late are you staying up charting rookies, looking at player film at this point? Like, do you even sleep at this point in the season, in the off season?
It's a lot. Like I spend most of the day, like at least pre-draft anyways. Pre-draft, I was actually late to the process this year, so it took me a lot of hours, like really crammed. So there was some late nights for sure, but not so much now. Luckily, I'm able to just kind of have everything in my head at this point and be able to spit it out when needed. So that helps for sure.
For those who are not familiar with Jon Macri, which I don't see why that would be the case, he's basically who we all should be thanking for all the fantastic IDP content over at Pro Football Focus, helping with the stats, with the charting of players. Literally, it gives us so information, and for all of us in this niche of fantasy football that we just love talking defense, we love talking IDP. We really owe a lot to all the hard work that Jon you put over there with everybody at PFF. So thank you very much for joining us tonight, Leo. Man, I know I said last week, come on back whenever you want. And here we are. Here we are. It's great having you back on. For those of you who do not know, Leo McNeely, #1 ranker in Fantasy Pros last year, ECR for IDP, runs RPO Football. How have you been, man?
Good. I didn't think I'd be back so soon, but a spot opened up, and I'm happy to be back here, and happy to be able to talk IDP with Jon and you guys again, and ready to talk some more rookies.
All right. Well, before we get into the rookie talk, let's do what we do every week here on Shoot the Gap, and let's ask our Inside the Frames IDP question of the week. It's a shocking question, I know, given the title of tonight's episode, but let's just get right down to it. The question is, what's your favorite IDP scoring format? Tackle heavy, big play, or balance? Jon, let's start with you.
Yeah, so for me, I prefer like a balanced scoring. I want most IDP positions to be able to score as similarly as possible, just to try to even out the value, right? Like tackle heavy can be fun because everybody loves linebackers, right? So they score the most, and then the big play stuff a little bit more boom bust. But I'm a balanced guy for sure. I like going on MFL and adjusting the scoring for each position to make sure it's as close as possible, basically.
Absolutely. Leo, what about you?
I mean, I like them all. I guess if I had to pick, I'd say tackle heavy, just because that's where I'm most familiar. Like my home leagues, I've been playing for 10, 11 years. They're based on tackle heavy, so I'm most familiar. Like trade values and other things. And also, me and one of my buddies at Tackle Box Props, we spent a lot of time looking at tackles for prop betting. So with that built in, it's we spend a lot of time really looking at tackles. So I'm kind of leaning that way just because I'm most familiar, not necessarily because I have any preference for any of them.
Makes sense. For me, I have to side a little bit here with John, and you touched on it a little bit. The balance between individual defensive player positions definitely helps to make them more, valuable here and there. But I also like the aspect of balance scoring, in that if you adjust things, the right way, you can kind of get some comparability to offensive players. And I think one of the reasons why, I guess there could be several reasons depending on the type of fantasy football player you are, but I think something that can kind of be intimidating for the non-IDP crowd is like just don't know where to draw the comparisons fantasy wise between an offensive player and an IDP. So if you're able to actually adjust your scoring settings to a point where now you could say, well, your defensive linemen are comparable to your running backs or wide receivers, or your linebackers are comparable to now that correlation is starting to click. Now it's like, okay, well, now I'm understanding the value that these IDPs are providing for me in my fantasy football league. So yeah, I'm gonna roll here with balance myself. All right, so with that, let's get down to it. Let's talk about these rookies in terms of scoring format and which ones we're excited about. Now, as we talked about, or as I shouldn't say we talked about, but as we all know here on the show, and for those IDP enthusiasts watching right now, there isn't, a unified IDP scoring format. And I don't think there really should be per se. I think there's, obviously there should be some preference here and customization that everybody should feel free to take part in when setting up their leagues. That being said, for the sake of this show, we're going to be discussing these players from a 3-position designation format, such as your defensive linemen, your linebackers, your defensive backs. And we're going to be discussing this, despite the fact that there are a multitude of platforms. You mentioned MFL, John. We're going to be talking about it from a sleeper platform perspective, just to give you all a frame of reference of how we're approaching our analytical, talk about these players. So with that, let's get into big play scoring first. Let's talk about, first of all, what does that actually mean? So again, can vary from league to league. My definition here is when I'm looking at these scoring settings, I'm looking at the ratio of play to plays. So several articles out there, and there's tons of information when you can look up for IDP scoring. Typically what I've seen is that you're looking for a 5-to-1 ratio of big play points to solo tackle points. And so with that, you're generally seeing in a 3-position designation, a lot of defensive linemen see a bump up in value because of the whole sack heavy nature of the position. You could see a potential increase at the defensive back position. Coincidentally, we kind of make fun of, to a certain degree, the cornerback position in fantasy football, which, cornerback for the past, I want to say 5 years, there have been some that have made themselves to be very fantasy relevant, a la Kenny Moore, just to throw out an example, a Jalen Ramsey, for example. So it's not like cornerback is completely gone in terms of fantasy value, but they're fewer and far between. I think we could all agree on that. Whereas safety, you kind of find more of that value there for fantasy purposes. But in a big play, if you get that interception, or that helps. Although that's not really a sticky stat you can go off from week to week to kind of assess value. So with that being said, talking about big play scoring, John, let's start with you. Let's start with your couple players here. Who are you targeting in your IDP leagues, in your rookie drafts, coming out of the draft this year for big play scoring?
Yeah, so the first guy that I wanted to look at, or I thought of at least, was I wanted to go after like one of the more polished edge rushers coming out of the draft, and somebody that landed in a decent opportunity. So I went with Felix Anudike-Uzomah, who went with the Kansas City Chiefs at the end of the first round. I just think he has shown a lot more of kind of a pass rush toolbox coming out of college than some of the other edge rushers, even some of the guys that were in the first round along with him. So he's a little bit more ready, at least to be able to win in a variety of ways in the NFL. And I think it's a decent opportunity there in Kansas City with Frank Clark gone, Carlos Dunlap is gone. Melvin Ingram was there for a while too, but so there really isn't a lot of competition there. Yes, they have George Karlaftis and Chris Jones. Michael Dana is going to play there as well. They brought in Charles Omenihu, but the Chiefs really like to utilize a lot of their edge rushers on obvious passing downs, and they'll show those kind of mugged up looks and be able to deploy those guys all at once. They did that a lot last year, probably more than any team in the league. So I think there's going to be opportunity for Felix Anudike-Uzomah to get out onto the field and get some potential pass rush production and post some sacks and be a big play scorer that we would like.
Nice. Now, I have a question in regards to his tackle floor, or at least his production in college compared to what you anticipate here. The fact that they do use kind of a rotation of sorts here with these defensive line, with these edge rushers, do you see that maybe, or have you seen rather, that the tackle floor that he's capable of potentially helps bump him up a little bit in value here in a big play?
It might help a little bit, only because there's a little bit more opportunity for playing time in Kansas City. Like it isn't an impossible depth chart to climb, basically, with the guys that are there. And I don't think he'll get a ton of work on early down, so that it'll probably hurt his floor a little bit. So for me, it was mostly looking at kind of the pass rush upside, the sack upside, and things like that. We're playing with the Chris Jones and getting those looks from Steve Spagnuolo's defense to get after the passer. But he was fine as a run defender. He's very quick at the line of scrimmage and could win that way, but doesn't necessarily win with a ton of power. So I don't know if he'll play early downs in the NFL, at least to start his career.
All right. And for your next player here, I have to be honest with you. The second you filled in his name on the show sheet, I was like, oh. You had to pick him. Please tell everybody who I'm talking about here.
Yeah, so I went with Drew Sanders, linebacker, potentially hybrid edge as well, drafted by the Denver Broncos in the third round, I guess it was, out of Arkansas. So, yeah, former defensive end for Alabama. It was a 5-star as well. So he has that pass rush upside, and he definitely utilized it at Arkansas as an off-ball linebacker. So there's just a lot more for him to offer if he can hit on some of those pass rush opportunities, if he gets them in Denver. I don't know that it's necessarily a year one thing for him. Maybe he gets worked in like sub packages, for example. But as far as being an every down player as a rookie, I don't feel overly confident about him in Denver, but I definitely think there's going to be opportunity for him at least past this season with Josie Jewell potentially being a free agent at the end of the year.
Makes sense. Sorry, I'm having a little camera issue right now, so my audio is all that's coming in. Leo, let's go to you next. Who do you got for us?
Yeah, so I'm going to go. I mean, John took two great guys there. So, I guess first, Drew Sanders, especially on sleeper, he, with the defensive designation, I think that's a home run pick. So I went with two edge rushers that may take, a little bit more time to develop. So these guys may be more year two guys, but two guys I'm looking at are Nolan Smith for the Eagles, and then BJ Ojolari. So with Nolan Smith, landing with Philadelphia, getting to play opposite Reddick, and just the fact that Philadelphia, they can scheme those guys up. They had a whole bunch of turnover. I think they had 27 turnovers last year. They led the league with 70 sacks. So they bring a lot of pressure from a lot of different angles, and I think he'll get some opportunities to get some sacks, get some turnovers. I like his speed. With Nolan Smith, one of the things downside is, he didn't really have the production as much as you'd like that first round, rookie to have, but I think he's got it in there. So I think he's going to get some spot opportunities, and I think he can really develop it over time and really, create as he goes.
Thank you.
The second guy I'm looking at here is BJ Ojolari. they brought in actually the defensive coordinator from the Eagles, Nick Rallis. And, right now they're still kind of figuring out their defensive edge rushers. I mean, they're trying Zaven Collins out there. They have Sanders. I really like the pick here, for Arizona to potentially use BJ Ojulari. His brother Aziz, is playing with the Giants. I think he could be just as good. This past year, he had 46 pressures, and I really like his bend. That's what you're really looking for, these edge rushers and big play. I think he has that. He'll hopefully develop some more of the run defense over time. But these two guys, big play, sack potential is there. Those are two guys I'm looking at. What do you think, John, of those guys?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like the opportunity for Ojulari, right? In Arizona, there's just nobody there that, you're really concerned about potentially stealing a ton of snaps for him. Maybe he doesn't, lead the group in snaps, but there's at least room for him to get in there and play significant snaps, right? And that's what we're kind of looking for a guy that is a decent pass rusher and potentially put up those sacks and pass rush production. And yeah, Nolan Smith as well. It's definitely, it's a crowded room. And it might be more for next year or the year after that, but he's in a great spot to develop and learn from guys that are very similar to him. Hassan Reddick, especially, right? Hassan Reddick was an off-ball linebacker when he first came into the NFL, but was an edge rusher in college, and he's an undersized guy. Nolan Smith, almost exactly the same. So you got to love that. There's a great opportunity for him to learn from some very established veterans, guys that can do it well in the NFL. So I like that for Nolan Smith.
Great. And I'm going to jump in here for Jorge's parts. He's having a little technical difficulties. And I think he is back.
You summoned him.
You know what? The computer said no, but the show must go on. So thank God for smartphones. I'll tell you that much.
We're just about to talk about Lucas Van Ness, Jorge.
Okay, Lucas Van Ness. So he's the player that I'm really excited for in a big play scoring format. Specifically, unlike some of these other players who I'll talk about later, who I could see interchangeably as being swapped out, in different scoring formats. He, for me, really screams big play because of his versatility, mostly as an edge rusher. I don't see run stopping being one of his fortes per se. You look back in 2022, he had 37 total tackles, a 17-20 solo to assist split, 10.5 TFL, 6 sacks. Amongst 2023 draft eligible players, he was 14th in pass rush win percentage with a percentage of 18.8%. He's very versatile. He could play edge in terms of outside linebacker, or he can kick it into defensive end, which could be something that you could see here in Green Bay. Rashawn Gary is still coming off of injury. We don't know whether or not he's going to be ready to start the season. And to be honest with you, I could totally see Van Ness being somebody who could supplant a veteran at the other defensive end position in the 3-4 there. His ability to rush the passer. Here's the thing. He was very, very good, needless to say. Obviously, the Packers selected him 13th overall in the NFL draft for a reason. But he was never the starter in college. Yet he put together all sorts of fantastic stats and metrics and performances. So that is kind of mind-blowing. I didn't realize that till I read that today. And so it's going to be very interesting, the situation with Rashawn Gary, but he could potentially start at outside linebacker. He's, like I said, versatile, whether he's standing up or has his hand in the dirt. So for big play scoring, he screams value for me. He is DL eligible only on Sleeper. So, typically especially, we talked about how Sleeper is the platform we're basing this off of. I like to capitalize on those edge rushers that get DL and LB dual designations just because of the tackle floor upside. Again, not getting that, I feel like, with Van Ness. But yeah, definitely excited for him. Unlike this player, though, who does have DL-LB eligibility, who I am super excited for. We talked about him last week. Tyree Wilson, Las Vegas Raiders. I mentioned last week how happy I was that the Raiders realized, hey, in order to stay competitive in this division, we're going to have to keep at it in terms of rushing the passer. The Chandler Jones experiment kind of did not work out as they were anticipating, or at least when they paid him all that money. You flash forward to the first round of the NFL draft. Tyree Wilson gets drafted in 2022, 61 total tackles, 36-25 split, 14 TFLs, 7 sacks, a forced fumble. He was the edge 9 in total pressures with 50 in the Power 5 in 2022 with a 17.7% pressure rate. Top 13 amongst edge rushers, draft eligible in 2023 with a 22.3 win percentage. He's somebody who I think has a decent tackle floor. I could almost make the case for him in a balanced scoring. But the fact that he's so proficient as a pass rusher, and if given the opportunity to supplant Chandler Jones this year or maybe into next year, that tackle floor on top of his big playability, for me, anticipates him being somebody who is going to be elite at the defensive lineman position in a big play scoring league. So Van Ness and Tyree Wilson, super excited for. John, let's start with you. I'm kind of curious your thoughts on both. Let's start with Tyree Wilson. Actually, what are your thoughts there?
Sure. Yeah. So Tyree Wilson, for me at least, definitely feels more kind of like a developmental prospect, right? Like I don't see him as kind of this complete pass rusher just yet, but you can see the tools that he has, the athleticism that he has, and definitely the size and the wingspan to get to that point, right? So for me, I'm not drafting him a ton in rookie drafts right now, but he's somebody that I'm eyeing for sure to target kind of down the road, whether it's the end of year 2 or into year 3, something like that, because I think there may be a bit of a learning curve, or at least some lower end production for him, at least early on in his career. But when he hits that peak, I think you're right. The upside that he has is going to be very high. I think he can develop into one of those top tier edge rushers because of everything that he brings to the table with that athleticism, power. Again, the wingspan is pretty ridiculous, but yeah, if he puts it all together combined with the athleticism, then he could be an absolute star. But I just think it might take a little bit of time for him to get there. And yeah, Chandler Jones he was pretty bad last year, so it's not impossible for him to emerge this year at some point too. So
fair enough. Leo, let me ask you a question from like the fantasy side of things. Does the fact that he only has DL eligibility on a platform like Sleeper scare you off him for Van Ness, that is? Or does that not concern you because you're high on his upside?
I mean, these edge rushers, it doesn't really deter me because I generally don't play those guys at linebackers if they have the eligibility anyway. So it really doesn't make that much of a difference for me. I mean, maybe it gives you a little bit of flexibility, but I was going to play him at D-line anyway, so like it really doesn't really move the needle for me. But I do like his upside. I'm a little concerned about his lack of playing time, and some people knock his bend at the edge rush position, but I love the landing spot there for him in Green Bay.
Nice. All right. Well, let's go to our next type of scoring sitting here. Let's talk tackle heavy. Again, from the research I've conducted and looked at when it comes to actually looking for a good definition for tackle heavy, typically we're looking for a 2-to-1 ratio of tackles for a loss points to solo tackle point. So what does that mean? We want the hashtag tackle machines here. So let's start off with John. Let's start off with your first player that you're looking to target, rookie that is, in tackle heavy format.
So I went with Sidney Brown, safety for the Philadelphia Eagles. He was the second safety drafted after Brian Branch, who might not even be a safety. We don't know for sure, depending on how Detroit uses him. But I really like Sidney Brown coming out of Illinois, just a guy that has a ton of experience playing in the box, which we know creates tackles for safeties. That's what we want most.
Oh, have a little streaming delay here with John. Well, while we're waiting for him to jump back in here, let's go with Leo. Let's go to your first player here for tackle heavy.
Sure. Sure. So the first one I have is Jack Campbell. I mean, when we're talking top linebacker, you're usually looking for linebackers for the tackle heavy, and he got picked in the first round, pick 18 by Detroit. He screams, tackle machine for me. He's got big size, like he's going to be able to hold up, against the offensive line. I think he'll get the green dot too. He seems to be good at communication. And really, when you're looking at those tackle guys, you're looking for somebody who's going to be on the field 3 downs, and I think he can bring that pretty soon. I don't think it's too far off for him to take down Alex Anzalone there and take over that defense. It may not be the perfect linebacker room as far as like how they scheme up for tackles, but the fact that he's going to be calling the defense, he's going to be on the field every down, and he's had good history of production in Iowa. I think he had 125 tackles last year and 140 tackles the year before. I think right now he's my number 2 IDP guy getting drafted usually in the second round. So he's somebody I think a lot of people should be looking at for tackle heavy.
John, I think my technical difficulty bug translated over to your side. Apologies.
Sorry about that. No, it's my fault.
No, you're good. You're good. Don't worry about it. Let's continue with your talk about Sidney Brown here.
Yeah, so I don't know where I got cut out, but I was just saying, like, he has a ton of experience playing in the box, which is what we love for our safeties in IDP. That's where the tackles mostly come from. So that experience there, at least for me, maybe makes him the favorite to at least rotate down when the Eagles do call for that. Not that they did it a ton last year, but Terrell Edmunds, he was the guy in Pittsburgh, but Minkah Fitzpatrick was an obvious deep safety, whereas Terrell Edmunds, he has experience playing. So he's decent at it. He's not the greatest IDP, but he's a decent NFL player because of his versatility and ability to line up all over the field. So it gives Sidney Brown a chance to maybe be the guy, if he wins the starting job, to be the more tackle friendly and IDP friendly safety option in Philadelphia. So I really like Sidney Brown. I have him as my top safety for this rookie class.
Very nice. And your second tackle heavy player for tonight?
Yeah, second tackle heavy one was Diane Henley, linebacker for the Chargers. So I think he was the 3rd linebacker drafted. But looking at that team right now, I mean, they need help. Other than Eric Kendricks, I'm not a big believer in Kenneth Murray. He's had a few shots now to try to win a starting job. He's been very disappointing as a former first-round pick, and not even just in terms of being a first-round pick, but disappointing as a linebacker altogether. He's been very poor for his career so far. So I think there's opportunity for Diane Henley to jump ahead of Kenneth Murray on the depth chart. He's a lot better in coverage. He's a former wide receiver, so he's not going to be a liability as much in pass defense, and a really solid tackler as well. Didn't have a lot of missed tackles in college. He can support the run, do everything that you want out of a linebacker. So I think the opportunity will be there for him with the Chargers. It might not be a full-time role, but at least, looking at this rookie class, he's definitely not going to be Jack Campbell. I think Jack Campbell, like Leo was saying, is definitely the top option for linebackers and especially in tackle heavy. But I think Henley he'll be able to push for at least LB2 in this class.
Nice. And Leo, let's go with your second player in tackle heavy.
Yeah, so next guy I'm going to go with is Antonio Johnson. I think you can get part of what I like about him. You can get him a lot cheaper. I just picked him up off of waivers in one of my IDP only leagues. So he's going later, but probably pre-draft I had him up a little bit higher. And then he got picked in the 5th round. So he's dropping down a lot of people's draft boards. I've moved him down a little bit, but I still love his capability. He's 6'2". He's a box safety. In tackle heavy, you're looking, like John said, you're looking for those guys that are going to play it in the box a bunch. Get the tackle opportunities. His coverage isn't that good deep, so his coverage is better near the line. So I don't know that they're going to put him back deep too much. So really, he's got drafted in the 5th round. He's got to beat out Rashawn Jenkins, and I think his play dropped a bunch this past year. Even though, from fantasy point of view, Rashawn Jenkins got a lot of tackles. I don't know that his performance really, especially lived up to his contract that he's under. I don't know that they can get rid of him that easily, but I think, down the road, Antonio Johnson has a shot not only this year to potentially compete, but down the road too, especially in year 2. I think he has an opportunity. So I'm picking him up early now, and if he doesn't pan out, you can find another DB, or you can stash him on your taxi squad.
That makes a lot of sense there. In fact, I forget who it was, but which is kind of the crux of the comment I'm about to make. Many analysts have said that this was kind of like the steal of the draft here at the defensive back position for Jacksonville here. So that's definitely somebody who I'm also very high on here. For my tackle heavy players, I talked about him last week. He's been mentioned, in various places. DeMarvion Overshown, linebacker, Dallas Cowboys, 2022, 96 total tackles. Solo to assist was pretty even, pretty balanced. 10 tackles for a loss, 5 pass breakups, 4 sacks. He's a converted safety turned linebacker. He just is. I can't think of enough superlatives to talk about just how fluid of a player he is, how he can shed blocks, how he has the patience and timing to get into the backfield to make sacks. And has the range to play all over the field. And I mentioned this last week here, Leo, with you. If the rumors are true in Dallas that Micah Parsons could be just moving completely to defensive end and not playing that hybrid linebacker defensive end role, Overshown has a huge opportunity in this linebacking core. John, I was reading your recent posting. I think you posted it a couple of days ago as a graphic of linebacker utilization of like which teams utilize 1, 2, or 3 linebackers in their scheme, and Dallas was right there near the bottom of the list. So it's really a 2-man show, and so you have Van Der Esch, who they brought back. You have technically Jabril Cox, who I believe is his second year, heading into his third year. So you have that 1-2 situation there, but I would not be surprised if Overshown outshines Jabril Cox and earns his way into this lineup just because of his versatility. He almost made my big play scoring format linebacker here just because I like the fact that in college he was used on the edge. He basically was used like Micah Parsons is used. And so therefore, because Micah Parsons just happens to be on the same team, I could see him as just strictly being just a linebacker, but racking up those, high tackle floor, having a high tackle floor, and really paying dividends. A lot of people like to say that he has some, he's a developmental project here, but he may be good enough and fast enough and have that speed, especially in this defense, to really contribute, whether it's at weak side or potentially at middle, because I think Van Der Esch is currently the weak side linebacker. So this could potentially be a situation for fantasy gold if Overshown is able to land that spot. John, what are your thoughts here on DeMarvion?
Yeah, it's not, again, it's a decent depth chart to rise up. I don't think Jabril Cox is really that big of him. Clark as well. But yeah, Overshown, there's a lot to like, at least as far as size goes too. Like one of the bigger linebackers in this class. It was a small linebacker class for the most part, but shows really good range. Not elite speed or anything like that, but like you said, former safety as well, which could be a benefit in Dallas, which is more of like a man heavy coverage scheme, right? So they may ask him to have to cover guys up the seam and play a little bit more coverage, which is a positive for him, having that safety experience as well. So yeah, I like the call. I think Overshown could be a nice little addition there to Dallas.
So definitely whether it's somebody who is able to earn snaps down the stretch or lucky enough to get those snaps early on, or even into next year, we're playing the long game here in Dynasty. So I could definitely see him having some upside here. And speaking of playing the long game, my next player here I'm going to talk about, I think fits this category a little bit more given the depth at the safety position. I'm talking about JL Skinner here, Denver Broncos, 2022, 62 totals, 36-26 split, 4 PBUs, 4 INTs. according to PFF here, had the 15th most box snaps in any 2023 draft eligible safety this year, had a 13.8% tackle rate versus a run. He's basically everything you want out of a defensive back in a tackle-heavy fantasy league format. He is dealing with the recovery from a torn pec, which I believe he tore before the NFL Combine, which, that on top of the depth chart there in Denver kind of just bumps him down the list. However, let's look at recent news here for the Broncos. The Broncos brought in just recently Kareem Jackson, who, by the way, for the longest time, when he was back in Houston, loved Kareem Jackson. When he went to Denver, I was like, oh my God, he brings the best in coverage. He brings the best playing the run and just everything. He played, he had his time. That was my thought going into after last season, heading into this year. He had his time. He's probably not going to get brought back. Caden Stearns is probably going to be the person who's going to be supplanting him, and then they bring him back. And I don't know whether or not that's because that's a reflection of Caden Stearns, or maybe, this Sean Payton, led coaching staff just really believes in Kareem Jackson. I'm kind of leaning towards the former here. So that makes me a little bit even higher on JL Skinner down the road. Again, somebody, he has the size, he has the ability to play at strong safety, play as a box safety. He did that a lot in college. I believe that was at Boise State. But he's definitely somebody if he's available, and if you've had your IDP rookie drafts already, and you still have a spot here, and you have taxi squad spots, pick him up, stash him on your taxi squad. I mean, you're looking at somebody who could be walking into a situation next year, once he's fully healthy, once that depth chart kind of thins out a little bit, that could be a hard-hitting box safety that's going to get a ton of snaps in the box. And that's kind of what you're hoping for. You're hoping for the opportunity there. And so, yeah, I'm really high on JL Skinner there. Leo, for fantasy purposes, what are your thoughts on, taxi utilization, as well as just, strong safeties in general for fantasy purposes at defensive back?
Yeah, I like the strong safety, the guy playing in the box as my guy. I mean, it really all depends on how many taxi squad spots you really have. I mean, some of the times you're not going to want to save those for a defensive back, but if you only got 3 or 4 of those taxi squad, you're probably not going to save it for a defensive back. But if you got 6 or 7, then I think it opens up the door to stash one of those defensive backs. So I think it all really depends on how much room you have and how much room you have on your active roster. I mean, I play in leagues that maybe have 20 spots. I've played in leagues that have 53 spots. There's all different ranges of how many DBs you can really keep depending on the score. We're talking about scoring, but also just roster construction.
That makes a lot of sense. John, curious to get your thoughts on Skinner here as far as being a long-term asset in fantasy versus somebody that you're really thinking about for this year.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like him as a long-term asset. I really liked him in the pre-draft process as well. And I literally wrote up an article coming out tomorrow, has him as one of the sleepers for the safety position. So I'm right there with you. I just love everything that he does around the line of scrimmage. That's where he makes the most of his opportunities. And that's what we want for IDP. And you're right. Yeah, Kareem Jackson, I think 35 years old at this point now. Yeah. Caden Stearns, PJ Locke, very inexperienced safeties. So there's at least an opportunity there for Skinner to emerge amongst that safety group next to Justin Simmons as soon as next season.
Nice. Just folks, for a reminder, if you liked what you heard, if you liked the analysis here, please head over to our YouTube channel, like the stream, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell. Really appreciate it. And to round us out tonight, let's talk about the IDP rookies that we're excited for in balanced scoring. So again, what is balanced scoring and how does that relate? Typically, what I've noticed is that you're looking at a 3-to-1 ratio of big play points, the solo tackle points. So again, as we mentioned in the beginning of the show, you like the idea of balanced scoring because it brings a sense of balance across all the defensive, IDP positions, as well as helps with, kind of bringing some comparability to the offensive side of the ball. So with that being the case, let's go through our last few players here for balanced scoring. And this time, Leo, let's start with you, man. Who's your person that you're targeting for your balanced scoring leagues?
Yeah, so I only have one here for this category, but it's actually somebody that John touched on as somebody on the tackle heavy. So a little contrast here. I think this guy is also one of my top safeties, is Sidney Brown for the Eagles. So you talked about tackle heavy. I think he actually could fit in the balance scoring. A lot of these guys, you don't really safeties. It's hard to know until they start playing, but I think he could fit both balance, with big play and with tackle heavy. I like, he just had 6 interceptions in 2022. Will that translate to the NFL? We don't know, but he's got that potential in there. I like that he can really, he's physical, so he'll get those tackles, but I think he also has some decent ball skills, and he can really fly downhill, kind of like a Hufanga. So, out of the 49ers. I'd knock him a little bit on the tackle heavy because he had 14 missed tackles this past year, a little bit concerning. So like I kind of balance, with this balance, I kind of balance out, some of that. But I like his speed. I think his twin brother got drafted by the Bengals as a running back. So he's got that physical ability. But I kind of see him could kind of fit both, and I like him in the balance. He's right up there with Jordan Battle as my top 2 safeties. So I'm there with John. Just think he could also fit in the balanced.
Speaking of Jordan Battle, I think, John, that's
Okay.
definitely something that you're interested in. What are your thoughts on Jordan Battle?
Yeah, so I ended up really liking Jordan Battle. I know Brian Branch was the one that got kind of all the buzz as the top safety in this class, but Jordan Battle showed a lot as well coming out of Alabama, and over 3,100 defensive snaps worth of experience is important, especially for a Bengals team that doesn't really have experienced starters, at least in the NFL. They got Daxton Hill, who they spent a first-round pick on last year. But after that, Nick Scott only has 1 year of experience. He's a day 3 pick, I believe he was, when he came out, and there's really nothing else. So I like Jordan Battle to kind of emerge as a potential starter right away for Cincinnati. They lost Von Bell and Jesse Bates, so Battle as the safeties of the future there, and Battle really did everything well. I mean, he's a great coverage player, strong in run defense, can play in the slot and line up all over the defense, which you love to see from a modern safety. So I'm very high on Jordan Battle, and yeah, I'm with you, Leo. I think I have him as my number 2 safety as well.
Nice. And to wrap it up for your balanced scoring player, who's the last player we got for tonight for you?
Yeah, so I went with another Bengal. I doubled up in Cincinnati. I like Miles Murphy a lot. He's one of my favorite edge defenders coming out, and I actually don't mind the landing spot. He went a little bit later in the draft than I expected, but it's not a bad spot, at least for opportunity, as I know they lean heavily on Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard, but they both have their strengths and weaknesses, right? Trey Hendrickson, very much a pass rush specialist, doesn't play a lot on those early downs. Miles Murphy, a very well-rounded defensive end, so he can play on those run defense snaps and not be a liability, could potentially fill in for Hendrickson there. Sam Hubbard, run defender, not necessarily the best pass rusher. He puts up good pass rush numbers, but very much a compiler from that perspective because he's on the field so often. So there's room for Miles Murphy to even potentially be a better pass rusher than what Sam Hubbard is, I think. So really like him being able to kind of do it all, and he screams balance scoring for me in this defensive end class, where there's a lot of guys that are maybe more pass rush specialists, whereas some of the bigger guys that are potentially more run heavy players. So Miles Murphy is a big favorite of mine. I think he can potentially emerge, maybe not as a rookie, but down the road for dynasty purposes, one of my favorites for sure.
So Leo, last week, Miles Murphy came up in conversation, and so Nate had asked the question ever so eloquently, whose job is he coming after? Is he going to take over for Trey Hendrickson, or is he going to replace Sam Hubbard? Because 2 years ago, you would have said Sam Hubbard. Last year, you would have said Trey Hendrickson given the play. So, and then here we go. You said it yourself, the rotation, right? What is that? Are you still thinking that in terms of a rotation option here, or are we talking?
Yeah, you guys asked me that question last week, and I'd love to hear John's answer. But I was touching on last week. I was touching on exactly what John was saying, that like right now in his year 1, he's going to be taking some snaps, basically taking those deficiencies that each of them have and filling in both. He's perfect for this balanced format. I think he is a better pass rusher than probably Hubbard will be, and then he'll be a better run defender than Hendrickson. So exactly, but I didn't at the time when you asked me, I didn't have a great idea as far as like year or two of who we could potentially be taking their spot. So I'd love to hear what John has to thoughts for that.
Yeah, I think it's just going to depend on contract, right? Like, who do they have outs in Hendrickson or Hubbard? Are they going to need them to sign those wide receivers potentially coming up? T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, right? Space there. I haven't looked too much into the contract situations for Hubbard or Hendrickson just yet, but it honestly could be either one. It just depends on what he excels at in the NFL first. If he, ends up being a really strong run defense option for them, then yeah, maybe, it is Sam Hubbard if they can save some money there. But if it's a pass rush specialist, it all just depends on contract for me. I got to look into it a little bit more.
Nice. And so for our last player we'll be talking about tonight, I'm going to talk about Trenton Simpson, Baltimore linebacker, Baltimore Ravens. Really Patrick Queen dependent here in terms of immediate, opportunity. The Ravens did not pick up his 5th-year option. Before the draft, there was conversation that he could potentially be traded. A couple days ago, DaCosta comes out and says, "Oh, we're trying to sign Queen to an extension." Like, you don't know what the heck is going on in terms of that per se. We just know that if things stay the status quo, he probably is not going to be brought back to Baltimore last year, which for next year, Trenton Simpson to the moon. Love this signing. This draft. Here's the thing. And John, I want to go back to your chart that you posted a couple days ago. I think the average that you found for teams that utilize 3 linebackers, the league average was, I think, 19.4. And Baltimore's was just above that at 20.4 last year. So there is some wiggle room that potentially Trenton Simpson could get on the field if Patrick Queen does, in fact, stay here in Charm City. But it's really hard to deny what Trenton Simpson, his upside. You look back at his 2022 stats, 73 totals, 41-32, 3 PDs, 2.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. It's that versatility that makes me want to get him in a balanced scoring league just because of the sack and coverage upside that he has there. But he is graded out, in terms of his overall grades as a better run defender. But he can play in coverage. He has the speed to keep up with those tight ends over the middle. He has the size and speed to chase down plays all over the field. He is a ball magnet. So I'm definitely, on board with him. I could have gone tackle heavy with Trenton Simpson also. But I think his versatility, just because he's able to, line up in coverage and stay with, offensive players, as well as his speed to go sideline to sideline, as well as the opportunity. We saw last year for fantasy purposes, and again, it varies from league to league because of scoring settings. But I think we can all say in terms of play on the field, let me take that back. For fantasy purposes, you saw that Queen and Roquan Smith were able to find some equal footing. There was not a situation where, Roquan shows up and all the tackles go to him and then Queen's left just doing no, you found that they were able to divvy up those opportunities fairly well. So there is a situation where you can have a 1A, 1B in terms for fantasy purposes where you get Trenton Simpson a few rounds later in your drafts for redraft purposes. Let's talk about it from that perspective for a second. And he could potentially give you LB2 upside versus paying up front for the LB1 that Roquan Smith would command. But for Dynasty, I'm loving Trenton Simpson. He's somebody I'm definitely targeting for balanced scoring settings just because of everything he can do in coverage. Are you as high on him, John, as I am, or do you think there's still some issues here to be worked out with him?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, he is, the versatility is key, right? He kind of does everything well. He's not, he's not a perfect prospect just yet, but you see the athleticism, you see all the potential from him on the field. And I think he fits the Ravens defense really well because of not just his versatility of what he's able to do in coverage and things like that, but as a blitzer as well. Really good on those kind of delayed blitzes and being able to produce off ball and shoot through the A gaps and things like that. So with you, I think, he could potentially be a better player than Patrick Queen for the Ravens defense and what they want to do. Maybe it's not as a rookie, but at least year two, now that Patrick Queen's 5th-year option was declined, right?
All right. And with that, folks, that's going to close out the show. I want to thank Jon and Leo for joining me tonight. Jon, please take a moment, tell everybody watching and listening where they can find you on Twitter and what you're working on now.
Yeah, so I'm at PFF_Macri on Twitter, and all my written work is on PFF.com. Bunch of articles. I usually do about 3-4 articles a week during the off season. That'll continue in season. IDP, offense, whatever you're looking for, we'll write it up, and then also the Big Nickel IDP podcast over on the IDP show feed bi-weekly in the off season.
Nice. And Leo, awesome having you on again. Please tell everybody where they can find you on Twitter as well as where you're working on currently.
Sure. So you can find me at Master IDP on Twitter, and then you can find my content at rpofootball.com. And my rankings are also at Fantasy Pros. Currently working, going back through my Dynasty rankings and putting those rookies in there. Just trying to get caught up on that, and then starting working on my projections for Redraft League. So that's what I'll be working on here.
Very nice. And of course, you can find me at Jorge B. Edwards on Twitter, although I'd rather have you follow at Fantasy and Frames. Also follow the Shoot the Gap show's Twitter handle at Shoot the Gap IDP. I'm currently starting to make some shorts and YouTube vids for IDP, as well as post some Dynasty Target articles over at fantasyandframes.com. So head over and check that out. And again, if you liked what you listened on today's show, please head over to our YouTube channel, like, subscribe, hit that bell. Really appreciate your support. Again, Jon, Leo, thank you so much for joining me this week. We really got to get you guys back on really soon, especially right before the season starts, because the insight you provide from a fantasy as well as a football as well as a melding of the two, you guys are just fantastic, and the work you put out there is just phenomenal. So thank you very much for being on Shoot the Gap tonight. And with that, we'll see you next week, folks.